and I fáilte raibh an deis cúpla focail ará faoin ábhar seo tá sé thar a bheith tábhachtach aontaíonn leis an mBille agus aontaíonn go bhfuil gá pránach leis an mBille a chur tríd an dáil. I welcome the opportunity to say a few words on this, Minister, and you have my support in relation to passing this piece of legislation as speedily as possible. And you've explained in your and I've read the digest, and you've explained in your opening statement that there's two areas of reform. One is to allow a pause in maternity leave for women who have serious illness, mental or physical, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work of your department and also the women who forced this change. And I won't repeat, I share your gratitude to those people. And it's also to introduce reform for maternity leave for members of the House. And it's of interest, really, that how far this has been, how far back that people have campaigned for it. Indeed, the current Ceann Comhairle, apparently back in 2012, sponsored a bill for the maternity protection of members of the House, Oireachtas Bill, back in 2013. That's how long ago did I say 2013. And again in 2020, we had Deputies Niamh Smith and Anne Rabbitte to force this change, and I welcome it. It's unfortunate that it has to be so rushed through the Dáil, although I do agree with you on this occasion, particularly as the government is about to fall. But I always welcome proper discussion in relation to bills. We can only learn from reading and discussing and then passing a fully comprehensive bill. So I welcome what's, and I appreciate the urgency. In relation to the amendments that's going to be brought forward next week, it's unfortunate we haven't seen those amendments. I did compliment you and your staff yesterday, and I think it's very important that we have to do it. We're under pressure. However, again, I would have preferred to have seen those amendments well before so we could look at them. You will have my support in passing them. But there's always other issues around amendments, and it helps to have a discussion properly on them. And so when we look at these amendments to preserve documents, it's not to compel the handing over of documents, if I'm right. I hadn't had much time to study it, but it's to compel the preservation. So we find ourselves now in 2022, after so many inquiries, passing legislation to preserve and to stop the destruction of documents, which is very welcome and absolutely necessary. But when you pause and reflect on that, we're not compelling the handing over of them. Documents haven't been handed over on a voluntary basis, and we're now sending out a message: please don't destroy these, please preserve them. And you know, when you think about that, what is that telling us about what religious orders have learned or failed to learn, or what governments have failed to learn? You would imagine, after all the reports, that they would be queuing up to hand over the records so we could have a full comprehensive understanding of how we had 100 years of institutionalisation. The architecture of institutionalisation, I think, was Professor Smith's terms. Maybe I'm not using them precisely, but the concept is the same. 100 years of confinement, institutionalisation, and we have a situation where we're now forced, in the dying days of this government, to force through legislation to insist on their preservation. And then to bring that into perspective, we have in your briefing documents that we got, and again I want to pay tribute to the three members who were at the briefing yesterday, Maeve O'Rourke, Mark Cohen and Patricia Carey, and particularly those people on the ground who have taken the trouble to send us emails and to educate us. And then we know from Mark Cohen, I don't have the precise year, but sometime over the last couple of years, there were financial accounts of the Donnybrook Magdalen laundry were found in the abandoned former laundry site, several years after the Interdepartmental Committee to establish the facts of state involvement in the Magdalen laundries. Now, that report concluded in 2013, the Martin McAleese report. I was never happy with that. I won't hide the fact that I was ever happy with that. I read it from start to finish. And so years after that report told us there were no records, and similarly with Galway, which I know there are records, but that Martin McAleese report told us there were no records in relation to this institution. Mark Cohen, academic, finds them through the developer letting them in on site. And then if we go back further, while filming for the States of Fair documentaries in the former Magdalen Laundry at Sunderwell in 1988, that's how many years ago now, 1988, Sheila Hearn and Mary Raftery came across a large ledger of accounts in a cupboard. The building, of course, had been sold by the Good Shepherd sisters and was owned now by UCC. They made copies. They were very good. They made copies of these records of accounts and subsequently returned the ledger to the Good Shepherd sisters. And what did Sheila Hearn say? If we hadn't found the ledger, it would very likely have ended up dumped. And then the third example that you've given us, or somebody has given us in briefing documents, is the owner of a pub bought the contents from the Limerick Magdalen Laundry at an auction, and 4 financial ledgers from the 1950s were used as props in a pub. Can you imagine? The ledgers used as props in a pub, and they featured in a BBC documentary in 2014, and kindly the link has been given to us. And of course today's legislation comes after continued pressure. A report of the Commission of Inquiry into Child Abuse back in 2009, the Collaborative Forum, and I might add, which was never published except the recommendations, but the Collaborative Forum of former residents of mother and baby homes and related institutions asked for this, the Clon report asked for this, the Department of Education pre-consultation report asked for this, and so on. The Oak report, remember that consultative report that was done? It was very good. It took on board people's views. The Oak report prior to the mother and baby home redress scheme, they pointed out that it was important. And then the mother and baby home itself, for all its faults, the report made a recommendation, weak and all as it was, that the religious orders should be approached for their records. I wonder, did anybody approach the religious orders minister after that mother and baby home report? Perhaps you're seeking the answer, I don't know, there on your phone. But it is important to know, did anyone follow up on that recommendation, notwithstanding the weakness of it in relation to records from the religious orders? That's one question, Minister. You might answer that in your summing up. I'll be back in the chair at that stage, but I would appreciate an answer. Was that recommendation followed up? And then we go back to the McAleese report, and I remember reading that, and you know, words fail me as I get older, really, when I stand here after all the reports I've written, and it seems that reports are written to deflect, to divert, to hide, to obfuscate. And certainly McAleese report certainly did that. It was there specifically to see what was the state involvement in the Magdalen laundries and whether they were run on a profit basis. Of course, they couldn't really, they made a finding that they weren't, of course, but that wasn't really based on anything, because evidence was missing and documents were missing. And one was the Magdalen Laundry, one of them in Dublin, and the other was the one in Galway, which distinguished itself by a lack of documentation, notwithstanding that I've read in other reports, including the mother and baby home reports, that detailed reports were given on regular intervals of the profit and the money going in and out in the Magdalen Laundry in Galway to the Bishop of Galway. Has he been asked, has that diocese been asked for any records that they have? And I see again from this that some still religious orders are refusing to hand over or causing problems. So I welcome it next week. However, it is as good as we can do at this point under pressure in terms of preservation of documents, non-destruction, creating an offence, and then for the National Archives to be able to request a statement. And in the brief time I had with you yesterday or the day before, I asked what was the period of time within which, I think it's set out, or it will be set out, in which if that statement is required, what's the period of time allowed for that statement to be completed and sent back by the religious orders? And just clarify, what is the offence if they don't? And how will this happen? We're still utterly dependent on the voluntary nature of it, notwithstanding that it will be an offence not to preserve them and not to destroy them. How will that be enacted? Please tell me. You've had no cooperation from the religious orders in relation to the mother and baby home and redress scheme and making contributions. We have somebody working away, apparently beavering on our behalf, to intervene as a mediator. I don't know where that's at, but judging from the outside, there's been absolutely no cooperation from the religious orders for the Mother and Baby Home Redress Scheme. And I'll finish on the Mother and Baby Home Redress Scheme and take the opportunity to say I'm on record for deploring the arbitrary nature of the cut-off point of 6 months. So I think the best way I brought that home was, I don't want to mention the TD again, but who had a baby at the time. And I told him he was wasting his time loving that baby for 6 months, because according to the government theory, a 0 to 6 months is a tabula rasa. I don't think I can repeat that often enough, because you have arbitrarily excluded babies just a day if they don't on the right side of 6 months on no basis, notwithstanding that a whole list of psychotherapists and psychologists wrote to you. I never saw it in my life. Such was their concern at the arbitrary nature of that cut-off point. And of course, people who were boarded out are not getting a look in, as are people of mixed race who also suffered. So why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because we don't seem to learn at any stage that when we're making redress, it must be comprehensive redress. We can't continue, because of cost-saving mechanisms in the department, or some mentality of, that says, oh, we can't do that, it'll be much too expensive. When we know previously, when Deputy Curran was speaking, that the money hasn't been used, that people aren't coming forward in their droves and overwhelming the department or the coffers of the state. Quite the opposite is the case. So where is the scope now with the money we have to get rid of that arbitrary line? It's going to be challenged in the court. There's no doubt about that. It's simply going to be challenged in the court. So there's a chance to do it right and to make redress mean something. I have very mixed feelings about a national monument and a national site of conscience in Dublin. The way we deal with conscience is to apologise profoundly and with meaning, and then to make redress to those who have suffered. We will struggle with our conscience because we're all part of a society that allow that. But the best way to make redress for me is to, as best as possible, help those who went through such a vicious system to continue to live with dignity, with independence, and knowing that we have learned a lesson. That's not happening. So I'll finish just to say, perhaps you could just clarify for me the mechanics of how we're going to make these amendments when we see them and when we become law. How are we going to enforce them? And to tell me how the National Archives are going to be resourced, or anyone else that's involved in the implementation of this bill. What resources are necessary? What estimates have been carried out? And will the resources be provided? Gur míl magadh the cathaoirleach.